This idea of inherently knowing what is right, natural law, but not living accordingly can be found not only in Locke's treatises on government, but in ancient Greek philosophy. In the discussion with Glaucon with Socrates in the Republic written by Plato on the origin of justice, Glaucon argues that to do injustice is good, but to suffer injustice is evil. And it is only because the evil is greater than the good that we have laws. Glaucon argues that law is the midpoint between the best, to do injustice and not get caught, and the worst, to suffer injustice without power to retaliate. I mean, this is how the modern man sees it, no? I mean, doing whatever I want with no regard to how it affects or impacts others. I mean, this is kind of the theme of modern America. We want to get away with everything from speeding to lying to cheating to stealing. Meanwhile, we don't want to suffer the injustice of someone doing whatever they want, like stealing from us or killing us or someone we love. Car manufacturers might want to get away with, cutting corners, but we don't want to die when inferior materials cause grave injury or death. I'm sure you can come up with more examples yourself. We like to get away with doing wrong, but we don't like to be the victim of someone else's wrongdoing. Glaucon's position on the origin of virtue is that a virtuous life is not inherently good. It is simply the lesser evil. A virtuous life is honored because of the inability of men to do injustice and not get caught. A virtuous life, he argues, is involuntary. Glaucon says people behave virtuously involuntarily due to fear of the laws imposed. This sounds vaguely like Rousseau's argument that conscience is a construct of society. In this case, though, laws equal society's conscience because people are afraid of the consequences from breaking the law. They will behave the way the majority or the government has declared is the virtuous way to live. So, yes, this sounds vaguely like Rousseau's argument that conscience is the construct of society, and this societally imposed idea of right and wrong has corrupted the natural goodness of man by punishing or taking away their spontaneous impulses, because Glaucon argues that people cannot do what they would actually like to do. His position is simply that everyone would be bad or do evil if they knew they would never be caught, because it is only bad or evil because society says so through the laws they write and enforce, and being caught holds their actions up to the light of society. Actually, if you think about it, this sounds a lot like Rousseau's argument. However, Plato, Socrates, disagreed. In the myth of the ring, Glaucon challenges the teacher with definitions of the perfect just and the perfect unjust. The perfect unjust is the person who does injustice, perpetrates evil against his fellow man, but has a reputation for justice, for being good. The perfect just is the person who does only good, but appears unjust, or has a reputation with all the people for being a perpetrator of evil. The challenge is then posited. At the end of their respective lives, who would be happier, the perfect unjust or the perfect just? Although Glaucon is basically arguing that the perfect unjust man would be happier, because he got away with doing whatever he wanted and was never caught. Plato's response to Glaucon's challenge is simply that we cannot know. Indeed, Plato, or Socrates, does not know if one would resist doing evil if they knew they would not get caught. And pay attention, because Plato's argument also implies that there is an immutable measure of what evil is. Evil is evil, not whatever the government or man-made law says is evil. It's not just that we cannot know who would be happier, but we cannot know who would resist doing evil even if they knew they would not be caught. Plato argues some would resist doing evil and some would not resist doing evil. The only thing Plato is sure of is that everyone would experience an inner struggle, essentially two forces pulling in opposite directions. Plato's argument is that man has the ability to distinguish between his immediate desires, the imminent pull, and his long-range goals. He is able to distinguish between what he feels like doing from what he really wants to do, or his transcendent pull. He argues that man is free to the degree that he is able to choose what he really wants to do, and conscience dictates what one really should do. I'm pretty sure I bring this up later in the book, but this is also the idea that freedom is the freedom to do the right thing. Plato's argument is then that man struggles between the two poles, his immediate desires and his long-range goals. This, he argues, is the in-between reality of human existence. I think we can agree that this is something we all struggle with. We may want to eat the ice cream sundae in the moment, but ultimately that goes against what we really want, to lose weight. Or in a difficult moment, we may desire to drink ourselves into oblivion, but we know we might not only be risking our health, but our reputation, our relationships, and any number of bad decisions that could derail the rest of our lives. And these are the struggles all human beings find themselves in every day to one degree or another. Another way to look at it is the lower self versus the higher self. First, we all have a lower self, the human will not guided by the transcendent pole of existence, not guided by ethical conscience. Our lower self is closed to the pull of the transcendent. This lower self is our temperamental self. It changes based on our moods or our circumstances, seemingly at whim. Our lower self encompasses our drives, emotions, impressions, and ideas that remain unaffected by ethical discipline and are instead propelled by the mood of the moment. This is why an entire generation taught to rely on their emotions and feelings when making decisions can be so dangerous to the long-term future of society. Yet that is where we find ourselves in American society today. Just take a look at university campuses and activists and protest movements, and you can see how the behavior and words communicate passions, not principles, emotions, not vision. You get the point. But we also have a higher self, that something innate within us, which pulls us to the realization of our own true humanity, toward the realization of our highest potential as defined by a universally valid standard. Our higher self is open to the pull of the transcendent, the pull of something greater than ourselves. That is what makes it our higher self. This can also be considered our ethical self-awareness. If someone is guided by the higher self, this is someone capable of making an ethical assessment of their own thoughts, ideas, and behaviors. He is capable of recognizing what his life really should be like and able to then pass judgment on his own actions, and thus also capable of making decisions that favor the pull of the transcendent or that are in direct contradiction to the strong desires of the moment. Essentially, even though we don't always reflect on how we ought to live, in our better moments, we can allow our deepest insight into how we ought to live prevail over the ethically unstructured inclinations of our lower self. Against the limitless possibilities for imperfection and disorder open to the individual stands the spiritual force of ethical conscience. And it is this which holds out a hope of a truly meaningful experience. There is satisfaction in winning the struggle, to getting up early every day to go for that run, to resist dessert at a conference buffet, to turn down free drinks at an open bar. There is satisfaction in not losing our temper with our children, especially when in the moment we believe it to be completely justified, and deciding to be fully present with our spouse when we were expecting instead to watch the game. It is thus important to distinguish between the spiritual force of ethical conscience and the impulses emanating from our passions and drives. Ethical conscience is not simply one impulse among the many other impulses. In fact, it is not an impulse at all. Instead, our ethical conscience is an inner check that produces order by restraining our impulses. And when following our ethical conscience requires the holding back of those strong drives, those of our lower self, going against our strong emotions, it can involve considerable pain. Not just the pain of guilt, regret, and remorse we experience after we lose the battle to our impulses and act against our conscience, but the struggle itself can be painful. It can be painful to do the right thing. This ability to evaluate our actions based upon the pull of the transcendent in opposition to our powerful selfish drives of the moment is what we identify as moral self-examination. We have the power to identify right versus wrong and resist doing wrong, even though it can be painful to do the right thing. Happiness, Plato argues, comes from one's capacity to follow the inner voice of conscience, to do what one knows is right. And the internal satisfaction that comes from doing what is right is thus greater than any rewards another external good might bring. Such satisfaction or internal happiness or virtue is the highest of all good because it is a stable good, independent of circumstances. We don't feel good because we got away with doing evil. We are good because we freely chose to do good. This reflects the idea of natural law. Almost every human being is born open to the pull of the transcendent, and thus, as one matures physically, emotionally, and intellectually, they also have the ability to mature morally, with the ever-increasing ability to judge their own actions, reinforcing an ethical self-awareness. This implies that our higher self pulls us toward our highest potential based on a universal standard, much like Locke argues. So while Locke provides eloquent discourse on and organizes a political philosophy around natural law, we find in Plato's The Republic a philosophical definition of natural law. This is important because it demonstrates this idea does not only predate modern political thought and the Judeo-Christian worldview, but because it provides evidence of natural law itself, things that are innately known across cultures and times and never change over millennia. If, however, there are truths and law and rights that precede its creation, how can the United States be considered an experiment that was trying something new? It was new because they enshrined these truths and laws and rights into a document that was intended to limit the power of those that would seek to abolish them. They recognized natural law. The U.S. Constitution was a brilliant document, so brilliantly written it has been difficult to circumvent it in form, if not in spirit, which was the intent of the founders. Until next time.